morning. Thank you for coming to the EE Department Colloquium. My pleasure to introduce Dr. Tanay Karnik from Intel Labs, where he's the director of the newly formed or reformed University Research Office. Tanay has been with Intel since 1995 after receiving a PhD from the University of Illinois, Urbana. His interests are reflected in the topic that he's going to talk about. For all those interested in circuits, it's a very pertinent topic. Power management in high-performance microprocessors. Tanay is active also in the academic/research community. He's an associate editor of the Transactions in VLSI,
Transactions VLSI, yes.
Transactions VLSI, as well as in the major conferences like JSSC. So let's welcome Tanay, and we look forward to.
Thank you, Sumit.
Yeah. Thanks.
So it's great to be on UW campus. This is like. In '89, I spent a full month on this campus, but the campus has changed now. My topic of description today is about power management of high-performance microprocessors, but I wanted to introduce how Intel engages with universities first. And it's kind of you will see the difference. You will see the blue background slides made by some PowerPoint designer. They look very good when we talk about some kind of marketing slides or engagement slides. And then I come to the topic when they switch to white background. Okay. So let me introduce our collaborative research model first. How do we engage with universities? And then I'll go through the topic of the power and how we manage power, how we are trying to integrate regulators on the research side of Intel. And then we also worked on a lot of inductor integrations. You will find publications in my name on magnetic core integrations on silicon. So I'll talk about that for some time, and then future directions. Where are we going from here? So let's talk about the labs. Labs essentially has three distinct components. One is collaborative research with industry, government, academia. We work together with all of them. Take the knowledge, bring it to visioning, inventing, and validating. So we do not expect universities to build products for us. We expect universities to be ahead, do something new, we will bring it in, and we'll try it out. We will validate what you do. Don't expect to make completely ready product that is ready to be deployed or to be put in some software public domain open source licensing. And once we validate, once we think that things are working in the labs, then we transfer the technology, and we have pathfinding teams that work that comprise of some part of Intel Labs, and most of the team is comprised of the product team, and then it becomes into product. The product doesn't have to be a microprocessor. Product can be software. Product can be open source. Product can be even new business venture. I will describe one venture that we are working on today. Just to show, Intel Labs is everywhere. It's not just a US-based organization, although our CTO who heads Intel Labs is in Oregon, but the lab is everywhere, all across the world. This is the chart or graph that shows how we collaborate, or where do we want universities to be. On the extreme right side, okay, hope my mouse is. So you have business and industry groups. These are big investments of Intel, and we are building products, and we are trying to build something that sells in the market. Just before that are the pathfinding teams, less investment, but the horizon is longer, or it's closer to business, I should say. Then Intel Labs comes in, where we do research and we prove new technologies. So we feed into pathfinding, but universities are even ahead of the labs. Although Intel Labs is a research organization, we expect the university's research to be even ahead of the labs. And that's where we come in. That's where people like me engage with the universities and try to work together. We make sure that the ideas are flowing both ways. We make sure that it's not just we are using university work, we are also giving something back. In many instances, we do packaging for the projects. Sometimes we supply connectors, sometimes we supply models. Sometimes we also do take the input that universities are doing, and then we try it out inside Intel, feed it back to them for measurements. Sometimes we do measurements for the universities. So it's a collaborative model. It's not really a one-sided model where Intel gives universities money and then we expect something back. That's not supposed to happen in this model. My parent organization, University Collaborative Research, is designed inside the labs to feed the R&D pipeline and fuel Intel's growth. We lead world-class research and programs in partnership with Intel, academia, government, and industry. We do work with government, and this does not mean only US government. It means any government in the world. And we try to make sure that we follow all the laws, and we partner with the government so that we have some kind of a co-sponsorship in terms of money or people. When we go one step below UNCORE is University Collaborative Research, then we have 4 distinct offices inside Intel. University Collaborative Office, I will explain what they are, but it's about 100 faculty and 150 faculty, 500 PhD students are supported by this University Collaborative Office. University Research Office is my office, which is on the focused research. Collaborative Office on the exploratory research, distinction is coming. My office is on the focused research side, and we are at a lesser scale but more focused. We are trying to do something for the business. So it's about 25 to 40 research programs at a time running, yearly programs. Program means cluster of 4 or 5 universities, multidisciplinary, multi-BUs, BUs is business unit, or multi-university. There are 100 universities, maybe more, around the world we are engaging with today. And then we also have an office, University Programs Office, that supplies the curriculum, that handles the Intel fellowships, that handles the Intel early career awards and things like that. So they supply the curriculum material and build curricula so that the students are ready for Intel when they graduate. And then we have Intel Education Office, which is also known as Intel Press. So Intel publishes books and they go through Industry Education Office. This is the distinction that I am talking about. So on the left side, it's the 50% worth goes into investment goes into focused research, and the right side 50% investment goes into exploratory research. In the focus side, we are aligned with business unit priorities. On the focus side, we are disruptive. We try to do something new, something that is unknown, and we define it with the university. And the pictures are just showing a broad sample. Don't go through the pictures. I mean, they are just giving a sample of what we are trying, what are new, what are focused, what are kind of exploratory for Intel. Molecular detection, for example, it's not our business, but we still do invest in fields like that. This slide actually shows how it differentiated. It is differentiated. The focused research versus exploratory research, my office versus University Collaborative Office. Okay, maybe you are seeing the other way. In the focused research, we are answering research questions, and in exploratory research, it's kind of top-down, so we identify new research questions. In our side, we pursue goals and discover ideas inside Intel, but in the exploratory research, the ideas just flow freely, and then we try to make sense out of it. How is it going to be useful to Intel in future? On our side, we have a research case. On the exploratory side, this is a strategic goal to launch some center or launching a program. On our side, we are exactly know what we want to do. Okay, we don't know how to do it, but we know the problem space. On the other side, we are looking for people. Who are the talented people who can actually take such a challenge, take the money, and actually do something good for Intel. Hence, the partnership model is different. In my side, Intel sets the research agenda. When we define something, it doesn't even go out before it's ready to go out. We know exactly the problem space, what are the challenges, what are the vectors, what are the goals, what is the outlook going to look 5 years down the road. So hence, we have everything defined inside before we go out. On the exploratory side, we just partner with some academic PI, and then we build a large team of centers. We are competitively sourced, and the centers, except for 2 cases, 2 out of 12 centers were kind of decided. The main champion or main PI on the center was predetermined. We can protect IP, but the exploratory side, we cannot protect IP, as in it's a public domain contract, so that other companies can join. And finally, we are bottoms-up engineering driven. They are top-down executive driven. So this is kind of the distinction how we operate. We work together, and we have to have a healthy community. We have professors or PIs or researchers, students, not students, PIs who are shared among 2 models, but we are all doing something towards a goal. We are trying to do something good for Intel. This is explaining the University Collaborative Office, also known as exploratory research. So we have 7 ISTCs, Intel Science and Technology Centers. They are all across the US. They are by design inside Intel, inside US. Intel announced $100 million investment for these ISTCs 3 years ago. The first one was in Stanford, visual computing, but then the others started coming up. So pervasive computing is right here in UW, computer science department. Berkeley has secure, Carnegie Mellon has cloud and embedded computing. MIT has big data, and UC Irvine has social computing. All of these websites are up. If you want to search, either go to intel.com and type university research in the search button, or you directly write this ISTC acronym and you'll find them. When we decided to do something inside Intel, obviously there is a lot of Intel market outside Intel. What do we do with them? So hence we had to come up with another institute model, which is ICRI, Intel Collaborative Research Institutes. Now these are jointly funded by local Intel offices, the local governments, and whatever funding agencies that are around, or maybe companies like IBM or Microsoft if they exist. They are in Israel, Darmstadt, Germany, Imperial College London, and so they are in London, 2 colleges in London. Then Taiwan, NTU, we were talking about NTU Center, and then Saarland, which is also Germany. 5 different topics, and we make sure there is no overlap of research and they work together. So Secure here also works with Secure ISTC, or Visual here also works with Visual ISTC, and then their retreats or their reviews are jointly held so that there is no duplication of work. One slide about University Programs Office. So as I said, they have a PhD Fellowship Award, they have embedded curriculum, they have security curriculum, many core curriculum, and then we also donate hardware in the form of processors. When processors come off our manufacturing line, sometimes they are not sold because Intel logo has some blemish or something. I mean, the processor itself is good, it just doesn't look good. Those are just freely available for donation. So we do donate Intel hardware. We do donate Intel prototyping hardware for security and for embedded curriculum. And then this year we started Early Career Award on the right, extreme rightmost side. That is then an award for faculty who are in 2 to 4 years of their career, and they want some, if they want to get some recognition that, okay, they have, like NSF Career Award, but this is no strings attached. They don't have to propose a project. They just have to say what they do, and we select from those candidates. Finally, coming back to my office, University Research Office. So now here we are very focused. We are going to influence strategic directions of Intel and ecosystem. We are going to be doing focused, long-range, interdisciplinary university research programs. We do not fund other companies. We do not fund other startups. We do not fund other institutions that do research, like Hughes Research Lab, for example. We work with them, but we don't fund them. We only fund universities for PhD research. As I explained, the development and program goals, they happen inside Intel. We have technical champions who are, generally speaking, principal engineers, senior principal engineers, or fellows of Intel. They try to define something that is useful to Intel 5 years down the road, and then we start building up a team of technical experts. Sometimes the academics are consulted to get the technical input, but there is no set amount of target that this program has to cost this much. It all depends on what we want to do, what vectors we are trying to hit, what is it going to take. We don't know it a priori. We always give priority to multidisciplinary. So when we talk about wireless, we do give priority to something that spans from protocols to software to hardware to actual wireless components or circuits. It has to have long-range research horizon, obviously. And then our requests for proposals are semi-open. They are not completely open. They are not on www.intel.com for anybody to just go in and check what is up there. Requests for proposals are sent according to what the Intel experts suggest, who this proposal request should go to, and then we collect. One reason is obviously we have to cut down our load of working, but other reason is now I know the partner. Like if somebody proposes this has to go to this professor. If that professor wins, I have a partner that will continue with the program and make sure that the technology comes back to Intel, or at least gets evaluated in Intel and either becomes a product or gets dropped, but that's still a win. This is the broad spectrum of programs that are running or almost going to run right now, and this is the University Research Office as of October 2012. I should update some point, but I don't think things have changed. So we are in computing, we are in experiences. All corporations are struggling. There is an HP News today also, and then everything, all companies that were supposed to be horizontal, just making microprocessors, for example, Intel, we are trying to go vertical. We also have a big software company inside Intel that are building software. People are building software inside Intel. So we look into software for non-volatile memories, for example. The gray boxes are kind of new, that is likely to happen soon. We are looking into biosensors, some new sensors, new way of interfacing with computers. Then circuit signaling, you can read the list, and obviously the slides will be available. On the architecture side, we were obviously, for the multi-core era, we are looking at single thread performance improvement, we are looking at memory hierarchy. But the new Ultrabook that came into market this year, it still has a fan. So we are trying to avoid that fan at the same performance envelope. And so we have a program on fanless Ultrabook, more of a material and integration kind of program. Then we are in security, we are in CAD, and in the emerging side we have radical chemistry, new batteries, new ultra capacitors. We are also looking into a collaborative art development. This program is only for China, but it was designed to be only geo-specific, but essentially it's a computer science and art collaboration. And so we do various emerging technologies also. It's not just like we only do something specific. It has to be of Intel's interest today. Currently, the programs that are running, just showing some pictures. So we have a 3DIC program. We are going to build this prototype on the left side. It's going to include heterogeneous processors, heterogeneous memories, and heterogeneous processes. The packaging will be done by Intel. Assembly and packaging is Intel's problem. Design and silicon is university's target. Then we have a 64 gigabits per second wireline signaling. This is per wire, one wire carrying 64 gigabits per second, copper wire, not optical. So we have some platform modifications to make this happen. So we are working on that program. We have thermoelectric energy harvesting program, where again the thermocoupler assembly that happens at Intel. The actual coupler comes from the university. And then we have an optomechanical gyroscope prototype. It's actually demonstrated already. It's, instead of doing mechanical and capacitive sensing, it's more of the optical in, optical out, and the mechanical motion actually changes the lambda, and then you sense what happened in the gyro. So this prototype was also demonstrated. We are developing ecosystem. So we are putting on the Berkeley parallel programming side, we are putting parallel programming software out there. So that this is completely open source, available from Berkeley. You decide the program, you decide the application, you write a program. You don't have to worry about parallelizing the program. The software will do it for you. It will identify the hardware that you are going to run it on, and it will parallelize it automatically. On the memory hierarchy innovation side, we have a complete platform simulator running, where you can change the cores, change the memory, change main memory, caches, change the hard disk, remove the hard disk, whatever, and you can simulate. This is available from University of Maryland for download. This memory hierarchy has published 5 ISCA papers this year, and more than 20 papers at reputed conferences this year. And then in non-Boolean system, this is a non-Boolean computation of pattern matching. It's a very challenging problem. We are specifically staying non-CMOS, non-Boolean. And then we have a simulator available from University of Pittsburgh, jointly developed by Intel, that is also ready for download if somebody wants to use it. So we do put various things in ecosystem. And finally, the venture that I was talking about. Intel Labs also works on ventures. So these are not startup companies, these are business ventures that are incubated inside the labs, and then they become eventually, if they become successful, they either become another business unit or they are separated as a different company. One such thing started in my office 3 years ago, although my office's name was different. We started with harvesting energy from the backlight of whatever light is coming out of the laptop. We try to harvest that energy to put it back into the system. And from there we went into, we realized that the displays have to be flexible. Then we went into flexible displays, and now flexible displays has become the venture. We can build displays today almost up to 40 inches size. They don't lose their data. So once you program the display, it just stays, it sticks. And we have tested it for 4 months. It's a sticky display. And in the next incarnation, it will have the energy harvesting capability. So you can have a flexible display that also is self-powered, hopefully. And then if our harvesting capability becomes better, then we may have a system that will be self-powered. But that's the dream behind doing all of this. Now, finally, I'm coming to the main topic of the discussion. So now let's talk about power management of microprocessors. This is like most of the work that I did in Circuit Research Lab belongs to this problem. So just to motivate where the power problem lies, if you look at the trends of ICC, the current flowing through the die, and VCC, VCC is going down obviously, but not as much as it was expected. Although ICC for high performance CPUs is going up more than 200 amps. We are pumping 200 amps into a very small die today, and that's a heat problem. Even in the low cost performance CPU on the Intel side, it's still going up and it's hitting 150 amps. These are very large amperage numbers. So if we just do the math on the 2014 side, things may have changed by ITRS after 2005, but this is just to motivate the problem. At 0.8 volts, 150 amps, and if you are talking about 10% voltage fluctuations allowed, then you are talking about less than a milliohm, like 0.53 milliohm of impedance target. So from the supply, wherever it is on the platform, to the load, which is the microprocessor, you can only sustain half a milliohm in this entire puzzle, which is a big problem that we knew it was coming, and we started working on it long time ago, like 10 years ago. These were other projections that were also done at that time. So even if frequency in the ideal case was scaling up 1.5x at that time, but we scaled it only 1.25x to be realistic. Voltage was also realistically scaled by 0.9x instead of 0.7x. But even with these calculations, the power started to be too high. Today we have parts that can consume 200 watts or even upwards of 200 watts. This calculation brings you to 500 watts. There is no way you can pump that much current into a small 1 centimeter square die. So we had to look at the power, minimizing power, and power management became job number 1. We have to manage this power, otherwise there is no solution. We cannot sell. And then I don't have the pictures behind it, but at the server level, our customers like Google, for example, they are already complaining about utility bills. From our marketing side, we are getting a demand of 30% improved performance per watt for every generation. And we are adding cores to get the performance, but we are adding watts also. But overall puzzle has to be 30% lower. What do? Re-architect, redesign, reprocess, come up with new processes, make it denser. On the client side, we are building, power is medium level, but heterogeneity is coming in. We are integrating graphics processors today. We will have some more. I/O standards are changing. They are becoming more demanding, and if I/Os have to be alive, and hence they consume power. So performance is a problem at client side at the given power envelope. In the handheld, obviously, idle power and battery life is the king. We have to worry about all-day battery life for whatever we sell. And on the sensors and implantable level also, even if they consume ultra-low power, they don't have energy source either. They are scavenging energy. There has to be power conversion from whatever source to whatever you are computing, and there has to be a startup circuit. You have to know whether the energy is available in order to convert. So power problem is at all levels, and there is certainly something needs to be done. It's not just minimizing power. Sometimes we maximize power. This is the picture from second generation core microprocessor. Intel brought in the turbo boost technology for the core. and on the second generation it became even better. So the way to save power is not always minimizing the power per computation. Sometimes the way is to do work quickly and then go to sleep. So that was the idea behind this, and this particular core, second generation core, it provides performance boost dynamically. It has current and temperature sensors, and it has an integrated power control unit. It is monitoring what's happening on the die all the time. And because the control unit knows how to manage the power, we got about 8 bins more. 8 bins more in meaning we sold the microprocessors at a higher price point because we managed the power and brought the thermal design power lower. We also boost graphics power. It's not just the CPU power that gets maximized. Sometimes if it is a graphics intensive workload, graphics gets boosted, and we can get up to 3x more frequency range, do the work quickly and go to sleep. So it's not just minimizing or maximizing, it's managing what you have. So typical thing what is done in the management, power management, it's a nice slide I got from Harvard University student. Incidentally, I'm also in his committee. So CPU demand is shown in red, and voltage today, how it changes, is shown in blue. So voltage is supposed to follow the CPU demand, and but it's not really happening today because of the external regulators that are very much away and they cannot react quickly. The regulators are being brought closer on the package, sometimes on the die, and then they are still following in the middle graph. They are following the voltage frequency states almost close to the load demand, but there is still wastage of energy. We are still spending more energy than required, and the bottom chart is the ideal case where voltage should exactly follow the load demand, which is hard to predict, but if there is something that gives you this input, then we can save a lot of wasted energy on the platform. And this is the problem. It needs fast changing voltages, and that doesn't happen when your regulator is somewhere away from your load. This is just this is showing the two different applications, MCF and FFT, and showing that at voltage changes, if my voltage changes, if it is static, if it changes every 10 microsecond or up to as fast as 100 nanosecond, what happens to the relative power that I'm consuming as a function of relative delay? If the delays are getting smaller, obviously you are spending more power to do the computation quickly. But if you have this leeway of doing power management faster, then you can get as much as 30% benefit in the relative power on MCF application if your change is 100 nanoseconds instead of 10 microsecond, which is today on the platform. Another application is showing only 10%, but it's still more. Anything is better than nothing. So this is how we save power. We are trying to manage power by doing very fast voltage changes, and the frequency follows according to that. Common methods that are employed at Intel, in the first generation core, we had 3 major VCCs on the die. Of course, PLL had its own, and some other units had their own. But we had an uncore VCC. Uncore means the cache. Cache is the we mean limiter. Cache does not go as low as the core can go when it computes. So cache was separated. It had its uncore VCC, and then cores had their own VCC, which were power gated. They were not power regulated. And then DDR, memory bus, had its own VCC on the first generation. In the second generation, we decided that the GPU was also important. So GPU and memory and IO, they were on individual power planes. And because we cannot bring so many power planes in from an external regulator, we had to share the core and L3 cache on the same supply. So in this case, the core and L3 had to be on the same supply as in same voltage level. They could not be regulated. We do thermal throttling. So if you look at the bottom signal, processor hot signal, when processor hot signal goes low, which means the processor is hot, something needs to, processor signal goes high, that means things are hot, we have to do something about it. So Fmax immediately comes low, then the voltage follows it. If nothing works, then Fmax comes even lower, voltage comes even lower, and then we follow this trend until the temperature from high point comes down. Once temperature reaches a reasonable limit, then we again take the voltage up and then the frequency up. So this is how the algorithm operates. I mean, voltage has to lead the frequency, as in frequency voltage has to go high first, then frequency can go high. And the thermal throttling happens for individual core basis. There are thermal sensors on the die to make this happen. In first generation core, also known as Nehalem generation, and then later on Westmere, we brought in the power gating concept, which means if a core is not used, just gate it off. It doesn't consume any power. It shuts off the cores, and memory system and cache and I/O are on their own supply, which is fixed. Now, the way to gate the core is not that easy. Now, this is where engineering comes in. The amount of current that the core consumes is not easy to distribute on a die. So you have to go back on the package to distribute that current. So hence what happens is package bumps come in, current comes in, it goes to the power gate, goes to the die, goes back up into the package, and then it gets distributed on the die. So that means we are using the thick package traces to distribute that current, and then you go back into the core. Hence you get something like this SEM image where current goes in and out, into the die, out of the die, and then comes back into the die. On the second generation core, this was the first generation of Encore power gates. So Encore was also gated. This was the Sandy Bridge generation. And because power gates need to be staggered, otherwise there will be a huge DIDT problem, we staggered the power gates so that the wake up is slow and it's not everything is not waking up at the same time. VTT, which is the IO rail, was still ungated. That is for the Encore. And on the core side, there was again shift registers and shifted core wake up on this solution. And we also brought a C6, which is the deep sleep state of the die, where SRAM saves the critical state that is required, only the things that are required to wake up the die in its original or before the sleep state, and everything else goes to sleep. Cores are gated off, L3 is gated off, and only C6 stays alive. These are the standby states. So power control unit has to know what to do. Power control unit needs to be programmed what to do. So we program everything as P states, which are the active states where processor is consuming power, and it has a V to F relation. And at 100%, which is called P0, which is the maximum frequency state, and then it can go down to a low frequency and low voltage state. And there is a set determination of this relation. You cannot just change it automatically, so that the frequency actually follows the voltage and the platform is working at a power optimal state. Similar case, we have the C states. In the C0 state process, everything is active, but as you go from C0 to C1 to C2 to C3 to C4 to C6, slow things start getting switched off. They go to lower voltages, clock slows down, PLL goes away at some time, and also L1 caches, L2 caches are also going away. They are preserved in the C6 state, and the C6 state becomes active. The thing to remember here is that power, when it was high, it goes to almost nothing in C6, which means battery is not consumed. Battery still stays without draining. The penalty that we pay because of this is that we cannot wake up from C6 to C0. We have to wake up from C6 to C4, then to C2, then to C1 to C0. Hence, the wake up time becomes longer if you go to C6. So you have to decide, the power control unit has to decide when to go to C6. And it has to know that nothing critical, mission critical, is going to appear suddenly, so that you have to come back and wake up. At the way cores have P states and C states, platforms have S states or S0I states. And they have different power management styles. We switch SRAM off or Lake Logic off, or DDR is in service request mode. It always stays in service request mode, DDR bus. But then all the compute elements are switched off in the S0I3. And the effect of doing all of this is shown in this slide. Essentially, when you have full on, you see various things are on, and and then units are consuming power. On S0I1, DDR is on, computing is off, memories are on, and then you will see limited amount of current still being consumed at various parts of the die. and on the S0 I3 only DDR is on and everything is off, and then core is completely idle or platform is idle, nothing happens, and this is the best scenario for battery life extension. So we talked about what is the power management, how we do it, and there is a power control unit. So let's look at the advanced control methods that we have employed. In the second generation Itanium, which is the 64-bit mission critical processor that Intel sells, we had a closed loop system and we continue to follow it even today. So there is a microcontroller which itself is a 32-bit processor almost. It occupies its own 1 millimeter square. It's adapting voltage and frequency on the Itanium as a function of voltage droop and temperature variations. And the controller is, because it's on die, it can do things very quickly. And this was published in ISSCC probably 2003 or 4. Then we had a research network processor from my lab that this was published in 2005 ISSCC, which also looked at input buffer. This was a network processor. So in addition to voltage droops and temperature changes, we also had the network. We knew what things are happening. If the input buffer is full, we have to work hard. If the input buffer is not full, we don't have to work. We took that input and we adaptively changed VCC frequency and the body bias voltage in this case, and got the best energy efficiency out of the processor. In the recent times, core processors, as I said, they include a power control unit. It's a proprietary microcontroller. It has 1 million transistors. It's a control unit, but it's a 1 million transistor unit. It shifts from hardware to embedded firmware, and control can be adjusted. There are ways to program the firmware for the power control unit. It takes operating system input also. So we work together with Microsoft to make sure that the whole thing happens. It is monitoring temperature and current and power on the die, but it also taking OS inputs. And it's very sophisticated and very flexible for based on the application requirement. So depending on where we are selling the part, we can actually manage the power better. Then in 48 core IA that we published recently, and it's also available for universities to use. It also has a controller and voltage frequency domain adaptation, very fast. It's actually faster than the core processors. And then we publish load adaptive voltage regulator specs that goes to our customers. Our customers are Dell and HP and Lenovo. Why do we do power management? Okay, this is the picture that shows how much area is consumed by power system on our motherboards. It's a huge amount of area that we are trying to save so that things will become smaller and form factors will be. This includes first level power delivery, sometimes second level, 3 levels of capacitors, on die capacitors, land side capacitors, on package capacitors. Everything is consuming area to supply this power to the processor. We are not talking about computation. We are talking about even bringing the power to the computation unit. So we started looking into power delivery. Power management obviously had to follow match power delivery. They have to come together. We started looking into distributed fine grain power management. The efficiency of conversion from whatever voltage to the next voltage has to be very efficient. Should not consume its own power. The power converging unit should not consume its own power. It should convert it without losing any power. So it has to work across wide V out, I load, and also the range of I load. It has to be efficient at very low current load current specifications. It has to follow the speed step that we give to the customers, which is 12.5 millivolt per V step. It's a 7-bit code. And we have to do line regulation, which means we have to satisfy the line incoming power. We have to do load regulation, which means microprocessor load has to be regulated. Hence, it has to be multi-phase. And we also do voltage positioning. This is something described in this chart. So if the load current goes high and comes down, if there is no voltage positioning, the voltage that you are supplying and that's on the die will go down, and then at some point it will come back to normal, and when the current goes away, it will go up. So the delta voltage difference between the minimum point and the maximum point is kind of twice the penalty that you should pay. Instead, what we do in our processors is that we have voltage positioning. When current goes high, we come down to a voltage, and the control unit knows that the current is high, and it maintains the voltage at that low level. It doesn't actually supply the high voltage, and then it goes back up, so that your delta VCC is actually half in voltage positioning than the normal one, which means we can tolerate a larger droop or smaller. We can design circuits that can tolerate a smaller droop. Supply impedance, I am going through quickly this slide, but essentially what it says is that when you separate the domains, your on-die capacitor was your huge energy reservoir. When you separate the domains, now you lost that reservoir, because now it goes per rail whatever capacitor you have, which means you have less capacitor per voltage supply. If that voltage supply is supplying all the current to the die, then you have less capacitance, and you have a bigger problem on the die when you split. You have to take care of this problem. Other problem comes from supply industry. Due to the interest in time, I will not go through the problem, but essentially this is a reactive industry. This industry does not lead. It leads, it looks at what Intel or AMD or other microprocessor manufacturers are doing, and it supplies the power supplies to them. It will never lead. It has very low profit margin, so Intel has to take charge into doing regulators distributed and faster, and that's what we are doing. So going towards that, we started various experiments. For integrated for regulator integration, we started looking into near load converter insertion. We started looking into where the regulator should be, whether it should be on package or on the die or close to the package. Once you bring it in, the impedance requirements go low. It's shown in the next slide. Once we integrate the VR, we have to be sure that it works in the same digital CMOS technology. There are no modifications in the process allowed. It has to have improved load response. So hence, because the on-die capacitances are small, you need to have higher omega. It's the omega C problem. So they have to switch at more than 100 megahertz and do the conversion at the least losses. And it has to have multi-phase designs, and it has to supply multiple output voltages when you insert a regulator. The chart is showing amps per nanosecond, how it is becoming worse every single day. We are pumping 120 amps per nanosecond, even more today. In 2010, we were at 100 amps per nanosecond on our server parts. That's a lot of current in 1 nanosecond. This is showing why we integrate regulators. If voltage coming in and voltage coming out has a ratio of 2:1 or 3:1 or 4:1, the amount of current goes down by the voltage regulator module current. So if incoming current is X, then if the demanded current is X, then incoming current can be half X, given the regulator inefficiency. So assuming 85% efficiency, and if you have a 4:1 converter, you are bringing 4 volts and supplying 1 volt, then you are going to reduce current to 0.29x. The incoming current is 0.29, only 29% of what you are supposed to supply. Your capacitors go down to 15%, and your I2R losses go down to 9% by doing all of this puzzle, which means a platform that was big can become small. You don't need multi-phase on the platform, you need multi-phase on the die. You just bring in one phase, one inductor, few capacitors, and one supply. This is showing how multi-phase converters operate. You have one converter, you just short the output rail by building 2 different converters. And what happens is, if you put these currents that are supplied by the multi-phase converters out of phase, then your effective I/O has less variation, and hence your output has less variation when you supply. The chart is showing 2-phase to all the way up to 16 phases, and the variation in the output voltage due to the conversion, it's not even, we are not talking about a load, just conversion goes down as you increase the number of phases. Phase means inductor, if you are talking about inductor based converters. 16 inductors on a package for one rail is very difficult, but 16 inductors on a die for one rail is easy. Hence, you want to integrate the inductors, and you want to integrate multiple phases on the die. And there's always an optimal phase number given the input and output requirement. What are we supplying with the voltages and currents? So coming to what we have done in the Intel labs in the research world. So we have one 12 amp voltage regulator where the inductors were on the package, they were not on die in this case. So we had an 8-phase air core inductor which were 8-phase converter. The converter went back to the package for the connecting to the inductor, and the output rail came back in. V out, there was no explicit V out. The load was the capacitor. We had to bring in 2 times voltage, like 2.4 voltage, and we converted it to 1.2 volts or half or 1.2 volts or below. In order to run the control of the entire puzzle, that control has to run on the nominal voltage, which is 1.2 volts for this process. So we had to have a small regulator that converted 2.4 to 1.2 to operate all the controller of the converter. Then we had to have a half rail linear regulator to build the reference 2.4 to 1.2 volt reference, so that the output is tracking to that reference. And then we had to cascade the devices to handle the 2.4 volts. The devices are not designed for 2.4 volts. So we have to make sure none of the drops are becoming higher than the maximum allowed voltage on the die. We achieved about 85% in efficiency with different values of inductors and different conversion ratios, 2.4 to 1.5 or 2.4 to 1.2. We published this in Power Electronics Specialist Conference back in 2008 or 9. Then we went even higher in amperage. We went to 72 amps VR. Now in this case, the inductors were mounted between voltage regulator and CPU. This is an actual Intel CPU that was already in production. We just took the package and we stole some pins, and we added another, we added another connector for the control. And then this brought in 3.3 volts. So this was a 3:1 kind of conversion we could accommodate. And the inductors that we used were also specially made for Intel. They are not mass market inductors. They are very high Q inductors with powdered ferrite cores. And we went higher in efficiency, 88%, and we pumped 72 amps with a small die. The die is actually bigger, looks bigger because of the inductors, not inductor routing. It's not because of the active circuitry. Active circuitry is very small in that die. Then we took a server part and we decided, okay, we are going to do a power management IC that can supply to an Intel server. This was a 90-watt server. We had 16-phased coupled inductors. Now in this case, we brought the inductors also on the die. So everything was included in this die, and it looked like this, and it has many cells to supply 90 watts. But in reality, we only needed 3 cells out of all these cells to supply to this server part, and we booted the server with this power supply. It operated continuously without any virus, and we showed efficiency up to 75. It was a research work, but 75% efficiency for various loads, and we were at 90 watts. I mean, this was a big achievement with integrated inductors, everything integrated. Controllers, capacitors, inductors, everything in this die, and then we come out in a rail and then supply to the server. Again, the platform package had to be modified to make all of this happen. We took this, put it in a actual system, and the system worked. This was a Xeon processor 7330. It works. Now, why is it not in market? Because it's the second die. I mean, we are still struggling with this puzzle of why do we make a second die for all of this. This is slide is showing about inductors that we are using. We have very high inductance values on die inductance values. We are ahead of the competition in most of the cases. The nanohenries are up to 5 nanohenry. We get about 1700 nanohenry per millimeter in these special structures of inductors. Instead of wrapping a wire around the core, we wrap the core around the wire in this case. Okay, and we got about 10 Q at 50 to 100 megahertz. When we talk about Q in wireless frequencies, this Q will become 10 times or 100 times what you are seeing right now. And when we compared our inductors with the rest of the on-die inductors published in the literature, wherever you see Gardner, it's our work. Don Gardner was my team member for quite some time. He still continues to work on it. So we are high in inductance density. How much inductance can you get in a given area? And we are also on the quality factor on the higher side. There are some inductors that are higher than us in quality factor, but they are low in inductance that they can have in the given area. So other inductors are either energy efficient or energy inefficient or area inefficient compared to our solution. And we continue to work on it. We continue to modify the magnetic material that we integrate on the die. And this is built on standard Intel process. We pull the wafers out at some metal stage. We don't build the C4s. We do inductor processing, then build the C4s. And it's the same process, no more process modifications for the inductors. So going into future directions, one problem is obvious. We are going into higher and higher core counts. NeHalam had 8, Westinghouse had 10, Sandy Bridge had 12. Things are just increasing continuously. So all these cores need their independent control. So we need an independent power management unit as well as power delivery system on the die. We are going into SoC. It's not a news anymore. We are selling Intel-based phones these days. So what we want to do is take a big laptop kind of form factor that we are used to, shrink it down, take the VRs that are on the platform, put them inside, make the power management IC, consolidate everything, and ultimately we want everything included in one solution that Intel supplies that has power management and power consumption all together in one die. Same process, no process modifications. With that, I would like to summarize. I think I'm almost on time. So power management has to meet power delivery, and we started 10 years ago this problem, and you are still not seeing an Intel product with an integrated voltage regulator, which means it's a big engineering challenge. It's not easy to integrate regulators. Linear regulators are integrated, there's no problem. So switch capacitor regulators with MIM caps are integrated today in some parts. Qualcomm does that. Intel does that in some smart solutions. But inductor based are the way to go because they are also a regulator. Switch capacitor does not work as a regulator. Inductor based solutions are more desired, but it needs everything to change. We have higher power applications are going to need process modifications. They are needing device, circuits, architecture, platform, firmware, software. Everything changes when your supply goes from a platform to on the die, and you have nothing else but to just battery connected to a die. So we need new passive technologies. We need high voltage power devices or today's devices with different topologies to handle higher voltages. Packaging and fabrication issues we have faced and we are facing continuously. There are system dependencies. When do we control? When do we modify the hardware? Power loss and thermals are also an issue. When a regulator is 1% of your die, it is also a hot spot on the die if it is inefficient. And we have to support very large short transients. As I shown in one of the graphs, we pump 100 amps in a nanosecond. 100 amps in a nanosecond is a very large current change for a small die. Hence, we are proposing it has to be a paradigm shift across all levels of design. We are still working, we are still looking for ideas, and hopefully someday you will have an integrated chip that just connects to a battery and you're done. Thank you very much.
Okay. We have time for a few quick questions.
You mentioned the challenge on the inductor side. How about the power transistor? So any specific like a process?
The question was what is the challenge on the power transistor side in addition to inductors. So power transistor, so our devices today have the problem of NMOS body to source or NMOS body to drain. That is the biggest problem that we have. Hence, we are not bringing 4 times voltage. We are only building 3 times the voltage, right? So that is what is constraining it. So if we can modify the transistors and we can satisfy the cost requirements, we can make power transistors. I mean, it's not that we cannot make power transistors on our technologies, but it just additional masks and additional cost.
So you talked about power management for processors. Do you have a high-level comment on, say, wireless transceivers, other products? Do you have an equivalent emphasis on power management?
Yeah. So we are okay. So today battery life has become so important that yes, we are seriously looking into that. We have a new business initiative that will have a power management IC. I don't know who will manufacture it, but that will supply to all components on the platform, even the wireless units, and making sure that everything is managed together and hence getting the most energy efficient solution.
So this is work that's already going, because I assume that the design objectives would be, or the the degrees of freedom are quite different in managing.
So the question is about power management for example, wireless units and other parts of the die, not just the processor. And yes, I mean, so in terms of when we sell the reference design to phone manufacturers, we are deciding the specs what need to happen on the platform. We know the units that they will use and what kind of currents and voltage requirements they have, and load or delta V and delta I requirement essentially. So we are specifying all that to make sure that people are satisfying, our customers are satisfying all those requirements. But it becomes challenging when there are multiple industries involved and multiple thinking type processes are involved, different voltages are coming in.
There's no other question. Let's thank the speaker.
Okay, thank you very much.